Let's get things rolling, with this quote from Irish historian Patrick Weston Joyce's 1906 work, A Smaller Social History of Ancient Ireland. Quote, "Our literature affords unquestionable evidence that chariots were used in Ireland from the most remote ages, both in private life and in war. They are mentioned constantly as quite common and familiar in the ancient records, both legendary and historical, as well as in the Brehon laws where many regulations are set forth regarding them." End quote. I mean, case closed, right? There is no denying the long tradition of chariots in Irish literature, a tradition that starts, at least chronologically speaking, with Rihirled, who, according to the myths, is the 14th High King of Ireland in the line of Eber, son of Mil Espana. Mil Espana, of course, being the leader of the Milesians, who are the sixth and final mythical race to invade Ireland and who are thought to represent the arrival of the Gaelic-speaking Celts. Anyway, it is Rihirled who commissions the first chariots to be built in Ireland. And some decades later, Rihirled's descendant, the High King Rochtaid, whose name appropriately means possessor of wheels, becomes the first person to drive a chariot pulled by 4 horses in Ireland. This innovation would have occurred around the year 1000 BCE, going by Irish historian Geoffrey Keating's reckoning, or around 1375 BCE according to the Annals of the Four Masters, assuming it occurred at all. We'll get into it. But first, there can be no discussion of Irish chariots without bringing up the Irish hero Cu-chullain, arguably the most famous chariot warrior in all of Irish mythology. Indeed, Irish folklorist Dahi O'Hogan argued that the second part of Cu-chullain's name, while commonly believed to be a reference to a smith named Cullen, whose guard dog Cu-chullain slays, it's a whole thing, actually stems from an old Irish word for chariot, cul. Granted, the most commonly used term for the wheeled vehicle in the medieval Irish texts is carbad or carpat in Old Irish. Moving on. Cu-chullain's war chariot is piloted by the one and only Leg, the so-called king of charioteers. Leg also happens to be one of my favorite characters from the Irish myths, not so much for his prowess behind the yoke, but for his role as Cu-chullain's chief instigator. As I explore in my video essay, Who is the Greatest Hero from Irish Mythology, Leg is responsible not only for ferrying Cu-chullain around the battlefield, but also for riling the warrior up by hurling insults at him so that he can enter the Riastrad or war spasm, which is essentially the Irish mythological equivalent of hulking out. Now, as for the appearance and construction of Cu-chullain's chariot, here's what the story Tachmark Amira, or the Wooing of Emer, has to say. Quote, "It was a chariot of fine wood with wicker work, moving on wheels of white bronze. A pole of white silver with a mounting of white bronze. Its frame very high of creaking copper, rounded and firm. A strong curved yoke of gold. 2 firm-plated yellow reins, the shaft hard and straight as sword blades." End quote. That is quite a detailed description, lending credence to the idea that, yeah, even if most of the tales of ancient Irish chariot warriors were mythical or legendary, the vehicles themselves actually existed. Or did they? Because there are some inconsistencies in the texts that we need to address. For example, while chariots feature prominently in the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology, including in the cycle's main saga, the Tanbo Cooley, or Cattle Raid of Cooley, which sees Cu-chullain in the starring role, if you will, there are scarcely any references to chariots in the following cycle, the Fenian cycle, which follows the exploits of Irish hero Finn McCool and his warrior band, the Fianna. Unlike Cu-chullain, Finn does not ride around in a chariot, and by extension does not have a charioteer as a sidekick. On its own, this isn't necessarily a big deal. Perhaps the Fenian cycle tales, which chronologically take place later than their Ulster cycle counterparts, are simply set in a time when chariots had fallen out of favor. Only that doesn't seem to be the case. The Four Masters set Finn's death in the year 283 CE. Granted, Irish author and dramatist Seamus McManus, who argued for Finn's historicity, believed, quote, he must have died some years earlier, end quote. Regardless, Finn, if he existed, would have been doing his heroic deeds right around the time of the Battle of Crinna in 226 CE, a battle which absolutely features the use of chariots. Of course, the Battle of Crinna, or Cath Crinna as the text is titled, isn't exactly historical. While included in the King's Cycle, aka historical cycle of Irish mythology, it's likely that artistic liberties were taken, as is the case with most, if not all, of the stories from that cycle. So perhaps some overzealous scribe added the chariots to give the story some extra pizzazz. Which begs the question, could the same be true for the Ulster cycle and the Tonbo Cooley and basically all of the early Irish myths that mention chariots? Because the Christian scribes who first wrote these myths down were familiar with other mythologies, including and perhaps especially Greek mythology. There's a reason the Tonbo Cooley is sometimes referred to as the Irish Iliad and Cu-chullain the Irish Achilles. As Celtic scholar Dorothy Dilts-Swartz noted, while the, quote, wit and substance of the work are certainly Irish, the mystery is how its composer achieved his stylistic eloquence and polish. From the beginning of the 19th century, scholarly interest in Tonbo Cooley's similarities in motifs have been brought forward as arguments for classical influence, end quote. Here's an example of that influence. In both the Iliad and the Tonbo Cooley, the body of a slain enemy is dragged by the feet behind a chariot for all to see. Then there are the horses. The chariot of Achilles is pulled by the horses Balius, meaning dappled, and Xanthus, meaning blonde. Although in another iteration, a horse named Silurus replaces Xanthus, and in that version, the horses are the sons of the sea god Poseidon. Cu-chullain's chariot, meanwhile, is pulled by the horses Liath Macha, the Grey of Macha, and Dub Sangland, the Black of Sanglu, both of whom are described as dappled, and both of whom are born from the pool of Lyn Liath in the mountains of Slieve Fwy. In addition to sometimes sharing a watery origin, the chariot horses of both heroes share watery eyes. When Achilles' best bud Patroclus dies in battle while impersonating the demigod, Balius and Xanthus stand motionless on the battlefield and weep, refusing to let Achilles' charioteer, Automedon, drive them. In a similar vein, on the day Cu-chullain, who is also a demigod it should be noted, is to die, one of his horses, Liath Macha, refuses to let Leg the charioteer harness him to the chariot. Cu-chullain himself eventually completes the task, and Liath Macha cries tears of blood. Now, we can explain away such narrative similarities by pointing to a shared Proto-Indo-European origin, bolstering the claim that the ancient Irish really did use chariots and that any classical influence on the old tales has been exaggerated. However, it's hard to prove it one way or the other based solely on the literary evidence. After all, stories change and evolve over time. Manuscripts get lost and rewritten. It's not as if these stories were set in stone. So let's turn our attention to the physical evidence, to evidence that actually was set in stone. And to start, I will pose the following frequently asked question. If the ancient Irish didn't use chariots, why do we find depictions of chariots carved into Irish high crosses? To be fair, there are only 6 examples of Irish high crosses out of hundreds that bear such imagery, but still, how do we account for them? For starters, it's important to acknowledge that Irish high crosses are not ancient. The oldest ones date to perhaps as far back as the 8th century CE, a time when Christianization was well underway in Ireland. Thus, many scholars have interpreted the chariot imagery on these crosses as depictions of scenes from Scripture. And on the surface, pun intended, this makes a lot of sense given that these crosses are Christian monuments. However, as noted by Celtic scholar Henny Deleu, quote, on the other hand, it is well known that on converting the heathen Romans, the Christians used Roman symbols, compositions, and forms to get their message across. Moreover, there are some high crosses on the Isle of Man depicting stories from Norse mythology. Taking all this in consideration, there is a possibility that depictions of Celtic stories might be found on high crosses in Ireland, end quote. But Deleu doesn't stop there, arguing that Irish high cross chariots were likely inspired by the same story, a story that has a, quote, clear Celtic element, while also having, quote, strong connections with Christian topics. That story? The Sia Bercarpart Cu-chullain, or the Phantom Chariot of Cu-chullain, sometimes given as the Demonic Chariot of Cu-chullain. In the story, St. Patrick is trying to convert the High King Logera to Christianity, and the king agrees to make the switch on the condition that Patrick is able to raise the famed Irish hero Cu-chullain from the dead. Patrick obliges, and Cu-chullain shows up not on his lonesome, but in his chariot with his 2 horses, Liath Macha and Dub Sangland, and his charioteer, Leg. So where does this leave us? Back at square one, unfortunately, because it turns out the chariot imagery on the Irish high crosses is likely rooted in the same storytelling tradition that introduced Irish chariots in the first place. There really is only one road left to take, and that road is, roads. Or rather, the ancient Irish roads and associated artifacts that were recently discovered by archaeologists. The myths tell of these roads wide enough to allow two chariots to pass each other going in opposite directions. So it was certainly a big deal when, in 2006, a network of wooden trackways was discovered during an excavation associated with the construction of the N4 Dromed to Ruski bypass. Many artifacts preserved by the boggy landscape were discovered along these trackways, including the remains of a large block wheel dating to 1100 BCE. It's the oldest wheel ever discovered in Ireland. As to whether that wheel belonged to an ancient Irish chariot, here's what archaeologist Chulainn told the Irish Times. Quote, "There's very little evidence for vehicles in Ireland from that time. There are texts that describe Celtic chariots, but we have very few physical remains. With a thick and heavy block wheel like that, you are probably not talking about something light like a chariot, but a fairly large and sturdy utilitarian vehicle like a cart." End quote. Here's another point to consider. Even if the ancient Irish were able to tame the bogs, so to speak, by building these wooden trackways, thus allowing for the passage of wheeled vehicles, perhaps even chariots, the idea that ancient Irish warriors used those same trackways for chariot battles is far-fetched to say the least. Such battles would not have lasted very long. It's also worth noting that despite the presence of wheel remnants nearby, Moore believes the primary purpose of the wooden trackways wouldn't have been for facilitating wheeled travel, but for facilitating pedestrian access into the bogs, perhaps for ritual reasons or for gathering plants and food. The bottom line, there simply isn't enough archaeological evidence to prove with any degree of certainty that the ancient Irish were cruising around in chariots. Combine this lack of material evidence with what we know about Irish geography and with what we know about the scribes who first wrote about ancient Irish chariots, and what we're left with is a great collection of fictional stories about chariot warriors, Chulainn foremost among them. As a closing thought, I'll leave you with this passage from Irish author and cultural researcher Brian O'Sullivan, founder of Irish Inbus. Quote, "There are clear influences in the portrayal of Cu-chullain as an Achilles-like figure, but the portrayal of major combat using chariots is probably far more relevant to the stony plains of Asia Minor than the boggy and forested lands of 2nd century Ulster, where you'd have been hard-pressed to find a route suitable for a horse, not to mind a two-wheeled chariot." If you enjoyed this video, please like and comment and basically just tap all of the buttons, and by the end of it, make sure you are subscribed to the Irish Myths channel. That really helps. And if you want to learn more about the intersection of Irish mythology and archaeology, check out this article I recently published over on irishmyths.com about a stone fort that was recently discovered in Clew Bay, a fort that could be tied to the mythological Firbolg. As always, my name is I.E. Kneverday, editor of the short story collection Neon Druid, and creator of irishmyths.com. Thanks for coming out.